Is there anything I didn't ask you want to tell me? Something I really need to know? Throw it out there. Welcome, everyone, to The Impact, a sustainable CT podcast for your edification, your enlightenment, and your entertainment, too. I'm Jim Hunt, Communications Manager at Sustainable CT, so if you're looking for someone to blame for this podcast, well, you can blame me. But remember, this is never a one-way conversation. We always want to hear from you for our edification and enlightenment. Drop us a note, won't you, to info@sustainablect.org. The Impact is brought to you in part by our good friends at the Tremaine Foundation. The Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation seeks and funds innovative projects that advance solutions to basic and enduring problems, which is a very good thing. Remember, Sustainable CT is independently funded. We don't receive support from any level of government or from a university, not even from a magical rainbow unicorn money tree. No, sir, but you can be a Sustainable CT sponsor. Find out how at sustainablect.org. Today I had the good fortune to have three fabulous guests on our show. Monet Paredes and Lilly Adamo are both attending the University of Connecticut, and they, along with a cohort of UConn students, attended the 27th United Nations Conference of Parties, or COP27, that took place in November of last year in Sharm El Sheikh, Egypt. We were joined as well by Anji Seth, a professor of climate, weather, and physical geography at the University of Connecticut, who was one of the lead faculty administrators on the trip. Dr. Seth has been at UConn since 2005. She's also the Director of Applied Research at CIRCA, that's the Connecticut Institute for Resilience and Climate Adaptation, and a veteran of the COP process, having participated in these annual events since 2015. The COP process is an opportunity for world climate experts, activists, and leaders to meet and discuss measures to take, or not, to mitigate the climate crisis. And that crisis is acute. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the United Nations body established to assess the science related to climate change, modern humans have never before seen the observed changes in our global climate. And some of these changes are now irreversible. Scientists have high confidence that global temperatures will continue to rise for many decades, mainly due to greenhouse gases produced by human activities. That's us, folks. According to NOAA, that's our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the projected 10 to 12 inches of sea level rise over the next 30 years will be as much as the rise measured over the last 100, resulting in, among other devastating effects, up to $106 billion worth of U.S. coastal property permanently underwater. Global warming's toll is even greater, certainly more immediate, in other parts of the world, with island nations even now being inundated. Into the ongoing debate among world leaders, activists, and no small number of contributors to the problem as to how to address this crisis stepped our guests. I hope you appreciate hearing from them as much as I did. Welcome, everyone. I've been really looking forward to today's show. We have some great guests, and I'll quickly introduce them. Lilly Adamo is a junior at the University of Connecticut, majoring in environmental science and political science. She was a 2022 Sustainable CT Fellow working with the Western Connecticut Council of Governments at Sandy Hook, and she's a member of the UConn women's rowing team. Is that still true?
Yes,
Okay,
it is.
excellent. Okay. Monet Paredes is also a junior at the University of Connecticut, a double major in political science and environmental studies. As a 2022 Sustainable CT Fellow, Monet did her time at the Capital Region Council of Governments in Hartford, and Monet is a soccer coach. Yeah?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Anji Seth received her PhD from the University of Michigan. Go Blue! Go Blue. And is currently a professor of climate, weather, and physical geography at the University of Connecticut. Her research focuses on the physical climate system and how regional climates are likely to evolve in the larger setting of human-initiated global warming. Now, what do all these folks have in common? Well, perhaps much, but all of my guests today recently attended COP27, the United Nations 27th Conference of the Parties, attended by countries that signed the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, a treaty that dates from 1994. Hence the reason we're up to 27 of these things, with just a few years missing, if you do the math. Welcome to you all, and thank you so much for being here. This is a hugely important topic, climate, and one might even say it's existential. And I'm especially heartened to have two former Sustainable CT fellows here, bright young minds that are experiencing, achieving, and influencing so much in the realm of climate change. And we here at Sustainable CT can't help but be a little proud of you in whatever small part we may have played in helping you along that impressive path you're now on. So Lilly, let's begin with you if you don't mind. Welcome to the Impact. Very glad to have you. And tell me about your role at COP27. Why were you there? What did you hope to accomplish? How did you end up getting involved? How did you end up going?
Of course. Thank you so much. So going to COP was incredibly exciting. I went with the UConn at COP program. So it was a group of fellows that were selected through an application process. And my main goal in going was honestly just to learn as much as possible. There's a lot of exposure to information, data, being able to hear about people's lived experience with climate change and things of that nature. So ultimately, my largest goal is to be able to absorb all of that information and try to learn as much as possible. And it was incredible. And so it's an application process through the University of Connecticut and the Office of Sustainability at the University of Connecticut.
And obviously, this is something that only happens occasionally when there's a COP conference. I should probably, maybe Angie, can you speak to that? Is that true?
Yes. The UConn at COP program has been going on since 2015. The COP21 in Paris, the lead up to, we initiated the program.
Yeah, okay.
A couple of faculty members with the Office of Sustainability, Mark Urban and I. And so there is an annual COP in most years. There was not one in 2020 because of the pandemic, but right. Every year, towards the end of the year, there's a conference of the parties that includes all of the UN signatories to the treaty, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change.
Sure. So it's at Monet, maybe you could paint the scene for us broadly, if you would, like that. How are you able to engage at COP? What did it look like? How did it feel? What did your day look like when you were there?
So initial impressions it's very overwhelming. There's a lot of people there. There's a lot of things going on. It's set up so there's different sectors. So there's a whole group of buildings dedicated to pavilions, which are each country. Well, not every single one, but many have pavilions for each country. There's also pavilions of different topics, such as oceans, climate justice. There's a youth pavilion. There's an indigenous people's pavilion. And so you could kind of go, each pavilion would sometimes have different events. So if you wanted to go to those events, you could find them listed, and we would kind of decide what sparked our interest and what we wanted to see. And then you could also go witness negotiations that were happening between party delegates on the actual agreements that were being written down and made into a document. And that was harder to get into because they had limited space and a lot of people wanted to see that. But if you wanted to, you could also go to that. So a typical day, we usually got up and had breakfast. So we had a little breakfast club that, like Angie liked to call it, where all the fellows and the professors and the staff that came on the trip would talk about what we had witnessed the day before, have really good discussions over breakfast, and then we would take about a 30-minute bus to the conference and spend pretty much the whole day there. So we'd probably be there till around like 6:30, 7, and then go back. And so it was long days. We'd pretty much be going to panels, talking to each other, seeing negotiations, and all the fun stuff in between.
Had you been to anything like this, anything comparable before in your academic career?
I don't know. In high school, I went to conferences I was on student council, and that was probably the closest I've been to a big conference. But this was so much bigger than anything I'd ever been to. The amount of people was enormous. I remember when we had to get our passes, we waited in line for a while just to get our badges to get in. Sure. So yeah, there was a ton of people, and we were only there for the conference last 2 weeks, and we were only there for the second week. So we didn't even see what was happening the first week, and it was nothing like I'd ever really been to before.
Was it intimidating a little bit at first? Were you
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It was intimidating and overwhelming. And you have the opportunity to just talk to incredible people, professors, world leaders, delegates, negotiators, and it is intimidating. And the first day, I think we all were kind of like hesitant to go up to people or to speak, ask a question. Sure. And then as the week went on, I think we all gained more confidence in being able to just be, well, we're here, might as well just make the most of our experience.
Sure. Now, Anji, you led this group?
Yeah. So Mark Urban in ecology and evolutionary biology, and I are the two faculty co-directors for the program. And just before the Paris COP, the COP 21 in Paris in 2015, that's where the Paris Agreement was formed. That is when we had this sense that there was going to be a big international agreement that year. And we decided we should really take UConn students to experience what these international negotiations are all about so that they can come home and share that information with their with other students, with their communities.
Yeah.
And so every year we've been doing this. There's an application process, and it's an incredible opportunity for the students, but I have learned an enormous amount myself. And so, the students go once. I've been there 7 times now, and I've seen the progress being made and the lack of progress in many ways. But the events themselves are evolving to be bigger. There are more and more people that want to participate in these. UConn was one of the first universities that brought a delegation of undergraduate students. And so there are a few other schools now that are bringing undergraduate students to the event. And it's an opportunity for amazing students like Lilly and Monet to interact with world leaders, follow their passions and interests. I mean, the indigenous events that are going on there, there's a lot of protest kind of events as well. So you can really follow whatever interests you and learn a lot.
Well, that's fascinating. And it touches on a question I wanted to get to. We might as well pick it up. What other universities, students, educators were there that did you connect with them? And you said that we were you're the first undergraduate program that showed up there. And then I'm just curious too, you talk about like the protesters, and I'm watching this like everybody else on a TV screen, on a computer screen, TV screen, as it unfolds, and getting a very filtered version of it. So it's fascinating to me what it was actually like on the ground. Were marginalized groups out there? Did they have an effect? Were their presence felt? Lilly, did you interact with any of the protesters at all?
So in regard to that, when we would attend the conference itself, right when you walk in, there was often, I guess, almost sanctioned protests that were approved, which I do think that there was diversity in terms of the different type of protesters that were represented within those demonstrations. I know that there were also efforts to control it to certain areas. And like I said, they kind of had to be approved. Another good example of that is on the last day, there were banners that were put up in a part of the conference, but they had to be pre-approved. They weren't allowed to be put up until the last day when there was like a lot less foot traffic on that last day. Yeah. So I think that there's a little bit of both there. It was definitely limited because of where COP was held in Egypt. So I think that was definitely something at play. And then also in regards to engaging with other universities, we had the opportunity to talk to fellow undergraduates and also graduate students through the YA network, which stands for the Youth Environmental Alliance in Higher Education, which is a really cool opportunity because it's I guess like a smaller group within the conference, and they were able to connect us with different leaders. For example, we got to meet with a few US negotiators, which is really interesting, and had the opportunity to ask them a few questions and just hear directly from people who are doing the actual negotiating itself. It was a lot more like a direct interaction, but I definitely noticed that we, at least from my perspective, seemed like one of the larger groups of undergraduate students at the actual conference itself, which I think is really special, because just being able to gain the perspective and attend the conference like from an undergraduate perspective and have that sort of exposure to, like we've been saying, world leaders and all this variety of information related to climate change and all the action that's being taken is really incredible, especially so early on in our academic careers.
The concept of I don't know, sanctioned protesters always fascinates me. It's like, it makes me a little, these protesters are okay. Those over there, they're not. Let me ask you this, let me follow up with you. I mean, how seriously do you think the youth was being taken?
I would say in terms of like UN focused events and also speakers and panels, it seemed to be a really large focus, which I found to be really exciting. I got to attend an event where it was focused just on youth negotiators, and they sort of talked us through, there's a UN program that educates youth negotiators from different countries on how to best prepare for things like the Conference of the Parties and different negotiations. And that was really interesting because I ended up sitting next to someone who was a youth negotiator from, I believe, Indonesia. And so it was very interesting to hear her perspective from like going through a UN program that sort of prepared her for the conference and different negotiations and things of that nature. I definitely think that there always can be more of a presence, especially since for youth it's like future, and it's something, climate change is obviously such a serious issue, and just in general it's such a big concern. So it was promising and exciting to see, but there obviously always can be a bit more.
And this was the first ever youth pavilion at this COP, which is awesome, but it also highlights that it's taken 27 COPs to have a youth-centered area. So that just is showing and telling.
Progress of a sort.
Exactly. I expected there to be more students. I don't know why I expected that, but I was shocked at how little undergraduate students were there. Huh. A lot more like grad students or law students, but I did expect more students than there were. And like Lilly said, I did feel like we were like probably the biggest cohort from a university.
Now, as a viewer of these things over the years, the young people were represented there a lot more than I remember them ever being before. Again, kind of as a viewer, filtered viewer, and I think a lot of that speaks to the movement of young people over the last several years, but certainly this last calendar year, that movement really growing in climate change. And I mean, just beyond anything that I had been used to previously. And I guess that's been reflected now in COP. Now, Anji, did you have connections made dealing with any other educators there? And how was that side of things represented? Or were you strictly, I don't know, hurting your own cats too much? I mean,
our co-director, Mark Urban, is the lead in this YA program that Lilly mentioned. And so it's a consortium of universities that are working on higher ed and undergraduate education at the COP. So through that network, there were opportunities for students to connect with other universities and particular events and programs. There was a side event that was organized by the network, and some of our delegation were panelists on that event. So that was really great. And besides that, the kind of pedagogical approach that we use for the week that we spend at the COP, it's really about the students exploring the events on their own, because there's something for everyone. So as you can see from Lilly and Monet, they have different backgrounds. We have students from the School of Business and Fine Arts and all over campus. They are not, just environmental science students. Right. And so there and people interested in Indigenous studies and health. And so there, whatever the interests, there are, events and topics that everyone is interested in, and they can follow their own. But the time we get together is at breakfast every morning, where we kind of collect our ideas and what's exciting, what's going on today, what did we learn yesterday, and really have some sense of community. So,
and that's a fabulous educational experience of the type that you get out of it, at least to a large degree, what you bring to it, what you want to get out of it.
Exactly.
What you bring to this thing. I can't imagine why anybody would do this, but I've seen this, in conferences I've been at where somebody just shows up. Showing up isn't really enough. It's really somebody to bring something of yourself and what your interests are and pursue them. That really creates educational value, doesn't it?
And this is the application process that we do in the spring. So we're looking for students who are passionate about the issues, whatever issues they're interested in that are related to this. And so that application process kind of asks for students to demonstrate what their passion is related to, climate and whatever. And they should have some background and experience demonstrating that. And so all of our students are amazing in that way. So we have there are no students there just for the ride.
That's good to know. I would imagine not. Lilly, what are you most hopeful about coming out of the conference? If it's, let me just take something you wrote up, a piece you wrote up after you came back, which I thought was really fascinating. We both did a great job there, but you said there needs to be a 45% reduction in greenhouse gases to hit the 2 degrees Celsius threshold, but there's only been a 1% reduction. And surely this indicates a limitation of the process, right? If nothing else does. One might even have to say a failure of the process. So I'm wondering what are you most hopeful about, if anything, coming out of it? And do you consider that there are some limitations to the COP process?
So I would say just in general, so we had the chance to attend the gap assessment, and that's where those statistics and all of that data was brought up. And it is disheartening to hear how far we are from reaching these goals and thresholds that we've set, that we know that 2 degrees Celsius of warming is like a very significant number, and any even like part of a degree above that is incredibly significant, and the effects of climate change worsen beyond. And so I would say that I do have feelings of hopefulness, mostly from seeing more individual action. I think on a larger scale, when you add everything up, it is clear we're not meeting targets. But then when you sort of focus back in and look at individual efforts and new technology and people who are sort of doing that more individual level work, that's exciting to hear about. And we heard about that mostly in these sort of like side events and at the pavilions, like Monet mentioned. And so I think attending something like this and seeing all of these different nations come together to try to form a conclusion and try to meet these targets is encouraging, but it, like I sort of was getting out when I was writing my reflection, it isn't enough. And we do need to work harder to focus not only on adaptation, which was a huge focus in the conference, but also mitigation of greenhouse gases and addressing like the root of climate change itself.
Forgive my skepticism, because that's just me, I guess. But to some degree, does engaging in the COP process for some countries and some parties, not just countries, provide cover? I'm engaged in the process. I can't help it if it's a failing process. I'm engaged. So I've done my part. And I can somehow walk away from that feeling okay, or I can escape criticism to a large degree. I'm a participant. Mm-hmm. But if the process itself does not result in real progress, does then the process itself become a problem? And it becomes, because it's creating cover for bad actors, possibly, or creating a process that ultimately doesn't result in a solution. Monet, what do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about because at times with the negotiations, it seems very discouraging. And it seems like there are people there that are saying, okay, we've participated, so let's call it a day. And there is inherent problems with the process, but at the same time, the thing that was so nice about the conference was even though not a ton came out of the negotiations this year, it's the fact that you can see so many people there that do care and that are there to try to solve this problem, which is very overwhelming and honestly even emotional because it just being around people who you're hearing about youth education, climate curriculums in Zimbabwe, and also indigenous farming practice being re-implemented in Puerto Rico, and all these things that you just would not hear about and not get to talk and engage with people if you weren't there. So it is something to be said that there are definitely probably cases of people who do go there just to say, oh, we're helping, we're trying, look at us. But at the same time, I don't think that undermines all the good things that are happening. And there were 600 fossil fuel lobbyists there, which is insane because that's more than any
Go figure, huh?
Yeah, right. That's more than any people represented from Pacific Island nations who are being affected the most by climate change. So it's a lot of give and take, and the process is flawed, but a lot would say it's better than nothing. And there's channels for other conversations around different groups who do actually want to solve this problem.
I was just going to add to that the bad actors, right? If you want to start talking about bad actors, and you sit in the negotiations, there is room for everyone as a bad actor, right? Especially the Western developed countries.
Yes.
Because I wrote a little blog, and when you follow the discussions, everyone in those negotiations is cherry picking the science to basically they're like, well, we're going to choose this and this and this because that suits us and will benefit us, and we're not going to choose these elements because that's not going to benefit us, and the other groups are doing the opposite. So everyone is cherry picking the science, and I believe that is extremely problematic until we have all nations actually following the science. We're not going to make progress. And there is no nation except maybe the Pacific Islands and some of the most vulnerable countries that are actually willing to accept all of the science and not just the parts that benefit them.
Well, let's take a break here a second. We'll come back, and I want to get to one of those bad actors and when we come back. Let's take a minute and we'll come right back. We'll return to our program in just a moment. You've been listening to The Impact, a Sustainable CT podcast. Hey, while you're out there tripping the web fantastic, don't forget to join us on Facebook for some fun and interesting stuff. Be our friend, won't you? At facebook.com/sustainableCT. Twitter, too, while it lasts. Follow us at twitter.com/sustainableCT. And yes, of course, we're LinkedIn. Search for Sustainable CT from your LinkedIn page, and you'll find us right there being all LinkedIn and media social. And if you're not yet a subscriber to Actions and Impact, the Sustainable CT newsletter, you could be missing out on some very important information to you, to your organization, and to your town. Accept no substitutes. Do yourself a favor and subscribe today. And you can do that where? At sustainablect.org, of course. We've been having a great conversation with former fellows Monet Paredes and Lilly Adamo, and with Anji Seth, too, professor of climate weather and physical geography at UConn. We're talking about their recent experience attending COP27, and I wanted to delve a little deeper into the nuts and bolts of the conference, the policy results, and the players. Let's listen. I wanted to follow up on something, the elements, again, as a viewer, looking at this from afar, the two major things that were told to me on NPR was that, significant headway was made in establishing the loss and damage fund. Huzzah, right? but it was limited headway, and it was almost, depending on the media you listen to, it was either a significant step or window dressing. But there was definitely across the board, everybody, all the media that I was getting was telling me that there was a significant failure in calling out the fossil fuel industry as being, a major hindrance to climate reclamation. And you could understand why that would happen if you've got so many representatives from the fossil fuel industry there, as you mentioned before. Is that, Lilly, tell me, how do you feel about that? What's your take?
I would say that the Loss and Damage Fund, like coming into the conference, we all sort of had an expectation that that would be a really large discussion and something that would hopefully come out of the conference. So it is exciting to see that it actually was added to the final document, especially, I think, given the timeline of everything, it wasn't really even brought into official discussion within the negotiations until some of the final days and even hours. So the fact that it was created is exciting. I think the timeline for true action related to the Loss and Damage Fund might be a bit more challenging, just in terms of actually having the funding for it. Right. It seems like that may not even be finalized until COP28, so about a year out from now, which I think is something like within this sort of format of having a yearly conference, the timescale of progress isn't necessarily matching what is needed with something like a climate crisis. It's a crisis because we need rapid action. And that also, in addition, the Loss and Damage Fund is much more adaptation focused. It's having funding for countries that are facing disproportionate impacts from climate change, not necessarily mitigating what's contributing to actually climate change. So I think that is something that needs to be sort of reckoned with. That was a shift that we saw at this conference. And while adaptation is necessary and incredibly important, mitigation is also something that needs to be considered.
Monet or Angie, either one want to speak?
It makes me mad as a young person, and it makes you feel powerless in a way, because they feel so big and ominous contributors to I'm meaning fossil fuel lobbyists and companies that are trying to get fossil fuels not mentioned in these documents. It feels like
that just seems crazy to me. Yeah.
But then I have to think about things that happen locally and things that like Sustainable CT are doing in local communities that can really do make a difference, even though they seem small. As when you have many small actions going on, it will make a bigger impact. And I think that if the conference was not held in Egypt, we would have seen a lot more people mad that fossil fuels were still not being mentioned, a lot more protesting, because usually at COP, there's a counter protest that didn't happen this year because of a counter conference. Because of it being in Egypt. I think we would have heard a lot more about that and people's opinions on it, which we didn't, as a symptom of it being in Egypt and their strict protest laws.
Well, who decides where these are? It's a UN function. How is it decided where these conferences are going to take place?
You're interested in that question because the next one is in Dubai. So we've got Egypt and then Dubai. And it seems interesting that crucial timing. There are two in a row, in the Middle East region. So the UN, they say that there's a process, and they say they take applications from groups that are nations that want to host the conference. And there's a process for doing that. And this is the way it came out.
Wow.
I would tend to think that there's some politic in there. And I would think
there'd be howls of, I don't know, just, are you kidding me? Yeah. There hasn't, I don't know, I haven't heard anything, anybody scream about it being in Dubai. Again, maybe it's my cynical mind. But I'm looking at that going, well, on its face, that doesn't look very good.
Maybe they're trying to squash protests. On the protest issue, there are a couple of different viewpoints. Normally there is a lot of protest outside the venue, right, outside of the conference, and there's very little control of that. So they can be quite interesting and effective. And as was mentioned by the students this year, the protests were inside and they were sanctioned. And so on the UN premises, they would allow protests, but in Egypt, they will not. Right. So all of the protests was inside the venue. And some of the protesters actually thought that worked out well for them, because then they were like in the venue and the negotiators had to walk by protesters. So a lot of times, the protests and the negotiators are totally separate places, so they don't get to see each other. So there was some different dynamics.
Monet, you touched on this earlier, I think, a little bit. So what do you want to do here in Connecticut now, based on what you took part in? Line from your piece that you wrote afterwards was a place to share smaller successes that can be duplicated throughout local communities. And what did you mean by that? What are some of the specific actions we can take here that might find its connection to COP27?
Yeah, so something I really walked away from the conference thinking a lot about and hearing a lot about was educating people and storytelling. I think sometimes students like me who are very involved with this issue, I get into this echo chamber of people who care about this issue, but it's hard to take it back and realize that there are people who don't know what's happening with climate change around the world. There's people who might not care because they don't know, or I don't know what thought processes are going on, but I don't remember hearing about climate change distinctly until senior year of high school, which is kind of crazy to think about now, considering how big of an issue it is. So something that I think could be taken into local action is youth education on this topic and what youth can do today. Not that I want to put it more on our generation to fix it, but I think thinking about people who are in power now and if they had that, what the difference would be, and how we can facilitate a growing generation of people who are trying to solve this problem simultaneously. And that can include like getting youth out into nature, having mentor programs, a variety of things. I heard about many Indigenous programs that were educating youth on Indigenous land management practices, which was really cool. And I think that could be something that could be used throughout the world, not just in the places that it was mentioned. But yeah, I think local action goes a long way, and that could be really beneficial to the overall issue.
That's what we always say. Well, and I'm sincerely curious, because we're always looking for some way to be able to shape our program, and not just for the outcome, the significance, though that's obviously important, the outcome of it, but also how do we engage people? How do we get them interested? How do we get them involved in making this work? Because it isn't going to work without people on the ground actually caring enough to do something about it. So any fresh ideas, any concepts that you may have come in contact with or been shown because of that experience, we're all ears. We're delighted to hear some new way, some fresh way of looking at this that we can bring to bear that might be more effective or more engaging in some way. One of the things that I was wondering that then, where do you see yourselves going, Lilly? Where do you see yourself going after this? Where do you think COP is going to go? They're going to have it again, presumably in Dubai. But you had spoken to it briefly earlier. What's the next step? What's next on their agenda? And what are you going to be doing? How are you going to continue to be involved in that process? Or are you going to do something else?
So I would say that I guess it would be next step would be just continuing to be engaged in the process. I think that sort of ties in to youth activism, is just sort of that pressure of knowing that there are eyes on it and that people care and people care about the outcome and want to ensure that progress is being made. And so I think one of the large things is coming into COP28 will be the finalization of the loss and damage fund. And then in terms of how I'm sort of taking what I learned at COP and sort of applying it in my own life back here in Connecticut, I would say that one of the large goals of the UConn COP program is sharing your experience with people within the UConn community, but also just the surrounding Connecticut community. So I think like even this podcast is a great format for that, just being able to talk about your experience. And so more people can hear about this because like even Monet mentioned, it's like climate change is obviously a priority for me, but there are people who don't know a lot about it, who need to hear about it in a lot of different formats, who need to be educated more about it. So I think that is something that definitely like is a route that I would like my own personal activism to take. And that I think I'm really interested in this idea of sort of like scaling up actions, like creating partnerships with other people. That was something that was super interesting to see at COP, is just the individual conversations that came out of it and the partnerships that you could see being made between even some like corporations and then like individuals who came with ideas from different nations who needed just to be able to talk to someone about it if they didn't have access to that necessarily within their own nation. So I guess like all in all, to sort of sum it up, I would say that like my next step would be continued education, continuing to have this as a focus within my sort of academic and also potentially even career journey. And then also just continuing to pursue like making connections with people in the environmental space and having that translate into larger action and activism.
You know, it's fascinating. I was talking to Emily Basham at the Connecticut Green Bank. I don't know if you may know her or not, but I think she's a millennial. I don't know. And I'm older than she is. And we were having this conversation about, well, we had to be taught about climate change. Certainly I did. This was not always a thing when I was a kid. Certainly wasn't. I was a fully formed human before, Al Gore did his thing and we started actually taking this seriously and really, focusing on it. My kids, they're on it from the get-go. They're like, there's no learning curve. They're immediately just tuned into this. It's a way as a matter of life, a matter of being, in some respects, it's kind of scary for them. At the same time, there's no argument about it for them. Now, there's still a political schism, of course, and more conservative families may have kids with a different attitude. I don't know. But that generational thing gives me some hope. It really does, that there's a whole generation here that now the debate is over. It as a matter of course and a matter of way of living, we now have to confront and deal with this. Let me ask you, Angie, are you going to continue being engaged with COP and groups like this? What's your future look like with respect to the COP process?
Yeah, I think this program is one of the most important things I'm doing right now. And so I hope to continue to be involved in it.
Yeah.
I have to say, honestly, I feel really guilty about traveling to these events. And personally, I don't think that offsets are a useful solution to flying. And so I think that less flying is more important than offsets. So, yeah, but I wanted to go back to your earlier question about fresh ideas.
Sure. And
I would say that one of the most interesting events that I went to was in the German pavilion. And they're in Europe, they're having a very serious conversation about how our global economic system works. And the fact that, GDP is the end all objective of every nation on earth right now, and growing that. And, there are many reasons why that's the case.
Endless growth, sure.
That there are many reasons why that's the case. Leaders, depend on growth in order to bring people out of, poverty, et cetera. And it has worked for many decades. But growth is also associated with material consumption and energy consumption. Sure. And there's been a lot of research looking at, can we decouple those? Can we continue to grow and reduce our energy use? And can we continue to grow and reduce our material consumption? And, in some places, there has been some reduction of energy use with continued growth, but at a global scale, that has not been demonstrated. And certainly material consumption, like churning through Earth's natural resources, is continuing at unprecedented rates to grow. And so we're at this nexus of what are we going to do as a society about this energy and materials growth problem that we have. Do we need to do this in order to have happy, healthy, community-driven lives? And much of the research says we do not need to do this. Beyond a certain GDP, growth does not improve happiness or health or education or anything like this. And so in Europe, they're having a really serious conversation about how are we going to change our global economic system so that we are not churning through nature and energy at unsustainable rates.
Mm-hmm. Not a new argument.
And so, but we need to be having that conversation in the US. I mean, there are discussions about alternative metrics to GDP, but there's no discussion about, actually changing the objective from GDP growth at this time in the US. And I think we need to have that conversation, and we can start locally in our communities by asking the question, right? How are we benefiting from this focus on GDP growth? Our governor wants to grow the economy, right? This is what everybody is talking about. Do we have to do that? What would it take to set new metrics for health and education and things that we actually want to improve rather than just GDP? And so how can we collectively decide to do that? And let's start asking those questions in our communities so that we can pressure our leaders to start rethinking the question.
I heard it described to me, it is almost a frightening prospect to be able, if we are to find a clean source of unlimited energy, because really what that will what that will introduce is scary periods of incredible growth. Right? There's no limit to growth if you have unlimited cheap energy.
Right. So then we just churn through the trees and the natural resources. Then
you just go ahead and use up whatever else natural resources and space and environment that you have. So there's that. It's not a simple black and white issue. Oh, well, let's run out and find a clean source of unlimited energy. Well, no, that's not the answer. And one of the answers, I know that this argument's been around for a while, not in the U.S. Right? Absolutely, you're right. Is how to have low growth, even no growth, in a more equitable distribution of sustainable value in your culture. And we don't touch that argument. No, we don't want to go there because it's not going to sell. That doesn't sell widgets, damn it. So, we need to end this on a more hopeful, a little more hopeful note. Did you experience any Egyptian culture? Was it cool there? Did you have Monet? Did you see anything, eat anything? I know were you cloistered?
No, I had some incredible shawarma the last night we were there. Yeah. And we got to ride camels in the desert, which was
really cool.
Yeah, we did we were taught some dances with some people there, which was super fun. I don't know if we had some fresh seafood. It was incredible. We got to go kind of explore the city at night after the conference and see a few things. I know a couple people from our cohort went to some museums and we went to tea shops, got to try some fresh tea, which was delicious. I don't know if Lilly has anything else to share. Did a lot.
Anything?
Yeah, I would say that I was very surprised by the level of nature there too. Almost the landscape is it's very different from here. Just like seeing the mountains, and it's very dry and you can kind of see really far. We had one night where we got a chance to do some stargazing, which was very cool because there's no light pollution there. Really? And then also we were right on the Red Sea. So we got to do a little bit of seeing the coral reefs, which obviously, as you know, the biodiversity there is amazing, but also they're at risk as well. So it was very cool to have that opportunity, because who knows how much longer that will be in its like current state. So that was something that's very incredible.
Yeah. That was very beautiful, incredible. Like, and we could just
the history and the culture so deep as compared to other places in the world. There's so many levels to it and so much history there. Do you think you'll ever go back for, I don't know, any reason?
I think it'd be cool too.
Any interest to go spend a little more time in Egypt at all? No?
We didn't get to see the pyramids, so that might be my good reason to go back.
I'm going to wrap this up. I'm afraid we're out of time. That went by very fast. You made it very enjoyable. So thank you so much, all of you, for doing this. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Monet.
We hope you've enjoyed today's edition of The Impact, a Sustainable CT podcast. This program is recorded, produced, and copyrighted by Sustainable CT. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for listening. Thank you to our sponsor, the Tremaine Foundation, for all they do. Thanks again to Lilly, Adamo, Monet, Paredes, and Anji Seth for joining us and keeping it real. And thanks to everyone for taking local actions that have a statewide impact.